We put out 2 media releases today. One deals with the prescription drug box that we have in our public lobby that's open 24/7. If you have any prescription drugs that you want to get out of your house, bring them down, throw them in this box, and walk away from it. We'll take care of it. There's 2 things we don't take. We don't take hypodermic needles, and we don't take fluids. Everything else you can drop in there, okay? Prescription drug abuse is a huge problem across this country, quite frankly. And we deal with a lot of prescription drug abuse related crime. So the more of that stuff that we can get out of your homes and off the street, the better. So please take advantage of that. A lot of people doing spring cleaning this time of year. Great opportunity to get rid of that stuff, and we'll take care of it for you. It's not good to really flush that stuff down the toilet, stuff like that. It's bad for the environment. Bring it to us, we'll take care of it. No questions asked, just drop it off. And the other press release we put out deals with you guys probably heard about the horrific crime that occurred out in Colorado last week, where the young woman was responding to a Craigslist ad and was violently attacked and had her unborn child, cut out of her. Horrific. We deal with a lot of online type fraud investigations and crimes on a regular basis anyway. And what I have noticed is nationwide we're seeing an uptick in violent crime. The internet is a great way to communicate with folks, and sometimes it's even a great way to shop and do business. But it's also a great way for predators to hunt their victims, quite frankly, and look for their next victims. So what we have decided as an organization is we want to do everything that we can to help the community, and we have opened up our lobby 24/7 for people that want to conduct their online transactions here at the police department. You can do it in the lobby, or you can do it out front of the building, okay? Now, we're not going to have a police officer there standing there monitoring the transaction or mediating disputes or helping collect debts or anything like that. But it gives you a safe place to go to conduct this business if you need to, okay? We put out a media release. It's on our Facebook page. Sergeant Belial can actually email it to everybody if you got everybody's email addresses, because there's also some neat tips in there about how you can protect yourself from becoming a victim to an online scheme, okay? But I just wanted you to know that our lobby is available for those types of transactions. Please pass the word, because we want to keep the community safe, and this is one way to maybe do that. So that's all I have for you. You're going to have a great night. I promised Courtney I would leave because she doesn't want to have to present in front of me. I'm a nice guy. No, one thing I want you to tell you about Courtney is she's one of our busiest law enforcement professionals at the Marshalltown Police Department, and she does some really neat stuff with crime scene processing and evidence management. Superstar employee, does a great job for us. We are so fortunate to have somebody of Courtney's caliber working here. One reason we need a new facility is so we can provide her with the resources and the space that she needs to do her job more effectively. 21st century law enforcement expects and demands a lot of technology and a lot of space needs to conduct this kind of crime scene processing and evidence management work. She does a great job. She can do extraordinary things if we give her the right facility to do it. So, Courtney Watts.
We have a great PD, and we get a lot of, we get to see and do a lot of neat things. So, as I said, I am civilian, so I am not a sworn law enforcement officer. If you look at statistics, it is a growing trend that a lot of law enforcement agencies are going civilian. There's a couple different reasons for that. One, it's cost effective. Civilian employees obviously aren't paid as much as sworn law enforcement. But when you have a sworn law enforcement officer that does crime scene work, a lot of times they are promoted or they transfer out. So you spend all this money to train somebody and get them up to speed, and then they leave the position and you have to start all over. So when you get a civilian, it's a lot easier to keep the training up. Actually, throughout the entire nation, I sit on a lot of different committees, and I belong to a lot of different professional organizations. Right now, I'm currently the Secretary and Treasurer of the Iowa Division of the IAI, which is International Association for Identification. Great websites, lots of different things you can check out if you're ever curious about more law enforcement, forensic science professions. I'm not a public speaker, so just feel free to stop me, ask questions. This is not my forte, but we'll wing it and see what happens. So, kind of a little bit about what is a crime scene technician. My job is to be called to collect evidence, basically. It's pretty time-consuming and tedious work. That's why a lot of the actual sworn law enforcement officers don't enjoy it, because you can be on scenes for a long time. You're looking from anything from large pieces of evidence down to the trace evidence, those tiny little pieces. I work with a bunch of great people, but I work very closely with the detectives. I do work with patrol as well as other outside agencies like our state crime lab, DCI lab. They come and help us out on a lot of different scenes. It's really important to be a team player because we can do great things when we all work together. Which goes into there's two different kinds of evidence that you can kind of think about. There's testimonial evidence and there's the actual physical evidence. The detectives work and get that testimonial evidence, whether it be from on-site interviews, if they're interviewing suspects, or if they're doing neighborhood canvasses, eyewitness testimony is kind of what that is. My job is to find that physical evidence. We come together, we can work together and solve some of these crimes. They may hear something in an interview that I'm not necessarily seeing on scene, and I'm not know that that's a crucial piece of the puzzle. So we can work together. Vice versa, I might be able to be on scene and find something that they're not knowing about, and maybe they're able to ask a witness or a suspect or a victim more questions about that. So it's really key to be team player. I'm called from anything from just criminal mischief, car burglaries. I don't come out to those as much. I've been trying to teach the officers to do a little bit of that, just so I'm not called out all the time. But the death investigations, robberies, fatality accidents I come out for, they just need general photos. I'm always happy to come out and try to help document those scenes. I do help the fire department sometimes with documentation. Captain Jones is kind of taking over that, which is nice. It's freeing some of my time up a little bit. Who has heard or watched the CSI shows? Everybody see them? Okay. What do you think of those shows? Anybody watch them frequently?
What do you think about those shows? That's more important. Yeah.
I don't watch the shows. Actually, when I came up here, Captain Jones had it playing on the screen, and apparently I didn't catch it fast enough for him. He was a little disappointed because I didn't recognize it. He was waiting for me to catch on the song. Does anybody know when they first started airing? Do you know when the first show, the CSI show aired? It's 2000. It's the year 2000. So they've been around for a very long time. The CSI shows, they've created a thing called the CSI effect. Has anybody ever heard the definition of that? Anybody? It's basically just an exaggerated portrayal of forensic science and what we can do. It's influenced the public's perception greatly on this profession. Juries, general public, sometimes they have an unrealistic expectation of what we can actually do and what is possible, I guess. All that technology that you see, only about 40% is actually real life in those shows. A lot of it is so exaggerated, and we don't have that technology. As great as it would be to have all that, it's not there. And it has hurt us a little bit, because when you go to try something or you go to present it to the jury, they expect some things that just aren't possible. And we'll kind of get into that when we talk about DNA and fingerprints and things like that. It has helped us a little bit, though, because it has brought light to the profession, and it has, I guess, opened people's eyes on what is really important and how that physical evidence is important in law enforcement and crime scene. So there are good with the bad, I guess. So So that's kind of the new modern technology of forensic science, but forensic science has actually been around for years and years and years. Kind of a pioneer of forensic science is Edmund Lockhart. Anybody ever heard of Edmund? He was a 1910 criminologist that theorized that every time you touch something or something touches you, you leave something behind. So think about the piece of pizza that you just ate. You probably, even though you may not be able to see it, you might have pizza on your hands. It's there. You touched it. You took something away from it. A doorknob, even though you may not think that you left anything, you probably left something behind. So it's been around a long time. We're going to kind of do a little exercise, I guess. It's really small. I don't know. Can you guys read that? If not, I can read it out loud. So I'm just going to read you a little story and then we'll talk about it. So you are called to a burglary that has just occurred. The suspect has been scared off before officers arrived. Once on scene, you discover that someone has tried to gain entry to the home by prying out the storm window and then breaking the inner glass. The painted storm window is found on the side of the home near a flower bed next to the bushes. There's a small drop of blood on the windowsill. Some of the pieces of broken glass are now stacked up neatly against the home. A cigarette butt is found in the flower bed. An officer in the area located a subject a few blocks away wearing Puma tennis shoes, pants with rolled cuffs, and a black wool sweater. The subject does not live or work in the area, and the officers find a pry bar on the subject. He tells the officer that he doesn't know anything about the burglary and has never been anywhere near the home. He has no explanation why he is carrying the pry bar or why he has a fresh cut on his right hand. You have no confession. You have no witnesses. How do you put him at the scene? Anybody have any suggestions? How can we put him back on our scene?
The blood, the cigarette butt, the tennis shoes.
He cut himself and there's blood on our windowsill, so we could swab for blood. Yep, it's fresh dirt in a flower bed, so we know he's wearing Puma tennis shoes. We can look at that and maybe see
wool sweater.
the sweater. The wool leaves a lot of fibers. We could see if there might be some fibers if he cut himself like on the glass and reached in.
In his cup of his jeans.
The cuff of his jeans could have dirt, brush pieces, glass.
Cigarette butt was that.
Cigarette butt could produce a DNA
Fingerprints on the box.
because it was neatly stacked. Yep. Anybody else?
Pry bar.
The pry bar. We can do a tool match because if it's pried and he left a mark. Anybody else? Pretty good. That's pretty close to all of them. So that's what we look for. Those are the clues and the things that we look for on scene. We don't have a confession, we don't have a witness, but through all of those tools and all those pieces of evidence, we can put him back at the scene. Okay, so kind of a brief generalization of what we do when we're on scene. It's kind of a list. First things first is we need to secure the scene. Now, I'm usually not the one who does that. I rely on my first responding officers to do that for me. It's always better to start large and get everything because sometimes we don't realize that the scene has drifted down the block or in another room. So we always need to start bigger. And then once we're on scene, we really need to kind of get a plan of action. That's why when I first arrive on scene, I always do a walkthrough with the officer just to kind of see. It's that first initial, okay, what do I have? What am I working with? It's just that first initial walkthrough. Notes are really important. When you're going back to write your report, if you've had 3 scenes in a couple days, they can start blending together. It's really important to kind of make sure you have everything documented. Reporting the scene, that's something that now with digital era, photography, take as many pictures as you can. It's really important. We don't do a lot of videotaping unless it's a major scene or homicide death investigations, things like that, but we do some videotaping. Sketching of the scenes. Anybody graph paper, pencil, that's what we have right now. That's kind of what we do for sketching. They do have some new technology out there, so if you have seen it on the shows, that does actually exist. There's Total Station and a couple other ones that will go in and sketch your room for you. It's pretty neat. We're not there yet, but we do have that. If it is a large outdoor scene, we are very fortunate to have the city engineer's office. They will come out with their GPS and they can make a map for us. They can coordinate all of my evidence. So it's been a few years we had an accident down where it's been about a block and a half, maybe a little bit further, and down to the next road. I had evidence all the way down where the truck had gone through. It would have taken me a very long time to be able to measure all of that. It's the middle of the night, it was cold. He came out, put everything in, and printed me this beautiful map. So we are fortunate that we are able to utilize them. Through that initial walkthrough, we really need to evaluate that evidence because we need to be organized and have a systematical approach when we go and actually start processing the scene. If we don't, we're going to ruin our evidence. We just start walking in and do a little processing here and then walk to the other side and do a little bit on this side of the room. You're doing cross-contamination, you might be missing something, plus it's going to take you a lot longer. If you go in with it organized, this is what we're going to do, we're going to start here, we're going to move this way, it makes it a lot easier on yourself. We need to document and collect all the evidence. So before I take anything from scene, I'm going to document exactly where I found it, whether that be through the sketch, the photographs, because if they say, well, if I have a glove laying on your table over there, and they're like, well, it was supposed to be over here, if I don't document that, I don't have proof that that glove was there. So that's why you take your overalls, but you also need to take individual documentation of each piece of evidence. After we've documented everything, we're going to collect our evidence. Always do a final walkthrough because you never know what you're going to miss, whether it be your own flashlight, which has happened before, or evidence. So you just definitely want to make sure that you conduct that final survey. Once you release the scene, your scene is released. You'll never get it back. It can be contaminated. You get one shot. So you need to make sure that you get everything that you need. Yes, can you go back if you get another search warrant? Yes. But could things have been changed? Could things have been altered? People could have contaminated. You get one shot. So you definitely want to take advantage of that and not ruin it. A lot of times people say, well, how long does it take? How long does it take you to process a burglary? Can't answer that because every scene is different. You never know what you're getting yourself into until you're there. Every burglary is not the same. If every burglary was the same and the person went in and stole just the TV and came out the front door, it'd make it a lot easier. But there's so many different aspects of it. I've had burglaries where they've climbed up on the roof, went in through a second-story window after they broke the window, and ransacked the whole house. So now I have a window on the second floor that potentially is my entry point that needs processed. I've had people go in the front door, and that makes it a lot easier, but it's just a way to show you that every scene is absolutely different. A lot of the officers on scene will ask me, oh, how long is it going to take? How long are you going to be here? That's when you're very thorough. You take your time and you make sure you look at every piece of evidence. They're actually really good about that. I usually have someone stand by, because when you're focused on, especially on major scenes, if you're focused on what you're doing and your evidence, you're not watching what's happening behind you, so you don't know if a person's crime, you don't know if your suspect's going to come back, you don't know what's going to happen. So it's really important that you always have somebody on scene with you, whether you're sworn or you're civilian. You also need to take into consideration exigent circumstances. We live in Iowa. It rains, snows, it's windy. We had a shooting a couple years back. We knew the rain was coming. We were watching the radar, and it was moving pretty quick. You pick and choose. You're going to get what you can, and you give tasks and tell everybody, okay, I need this, this, and this, and you work as fast as you can. We had, it was in an alley, so your dirt and your casts, they were getting ruined, but you just work as fast as you can and take what you want. Snow is another thing in Iowa. If you have a burglary, someone comes in and walks in the snow and you have fresh prints, if it's continuing to snow, you want to get those covered as soon as possible until you can get those processed. My officers are fantastic about that. When they call me in the middle of the night, they'll say, hey, I have this, this, and this. What do you want me to do? I've had them cover them with tarps, garbage can lids, whatever it can be, whatever they can do to help is a good thing. On the PowerPoint you can't see it as well, but if you were to go up there, it says what kind of shoe it is, so that's always helpful. So there's kind of two front runners on evidence collection that people think of. That's DNA and fingerprints. DNA is not always available, and I think that's one thing that CSI or those shows have kind of hurt for us is everybody expects it. They think that you should instantly get it. They think that if I touch this that there's going to be DNA because I touched it. Now touch DNA has really grown. We're not quite there. We send all of our DNA to be analyzed through the state lab, which is in Ankeny. If you ever get a chance to go down there, definitely go down and look at it. But there's only so much they can do too. So urine and feces are not a good source of DNA. So if you call and tell me that someone peed on your car, I can't help you. I've had a lot of people say, but they peed on it. There's not a lot that you can do. We just had some burglaries where someone urinated on lots of stuff, but unfortunately it's just not a good source. Not impossible, but our lab doesn't accept it. Everybody thinks that hair, if you see a hair, well, that has to have DNA. It really is not that good of a source if you think about it, unless it's actually pulled and you have that follicle on the end. It's not a good source of DNA, unfortunately. Also, when we have DNA as evidence that we submit, the problem is the state lab is just like a lot of different companies, agencies everywhere. They're limited on their employees and their resources, and they are working fairly short-staffed. When we submit something to the lab for DNA, results coming back to us right now are about 9 to 12 months. So, they do prioritize and they do help us out if we do have a high-profile case or homicides, robberies, things like that. They will put that above a burglary, but unfortunately it does take time. So a lot of people don't realize that, and if they, they want to know why we're not doing anything, it's kind of at a standstill and out of our hands because we have to go through the state lab for that. It's called, the system that they put the DNA through is called CODIS. It's a national database. I believe in CODIS there's almost 50 million profiles, so it compares a lot. We actually just had a case that I sent down last year, and I don't have a suspect yet, but I was able to say that the suspect from this burglary is probably the same suspect from a 2010 burglary, but they're just not in CODIS. So that's one thing, if you think about it, they keep those cases in there for you, so they're always continuously rechecking. So hopefully, if that suspect ever does make it into CODIS, that's going to, a hit will come back to me and they'll say, yes, they did the 2010 and your 2014. Fortunately, in 2010, we can't do anything. It's past the statute of limitations, but at least we know that they've kind of been out committing burglaries, I guess.
How long is this statute?
Depends on the crime. So, just depends on what it is. Okay, fingerprints. Did everybody take a fingerprint? If you want one, great. If you didn't, that's okay. If you want to go and do a fingerprint, I have an ink pad and just paper right where you signed in at. Kind of gives you something to look at because they're not very good in the PowerPoint. I love processing for fingerprints almost as much as I love processing for footwear, but does anybody else want to go get one? So there's 3 different classes of fingerprints. There's loops, whorls, and arches. Just because you have one loop on one finger does not mean that you're all loops. You could have a variety on all your fingers because they are completely different. Arches are the least common. Those are about 5% of the population have arches on their finger. Whorls are about 35%, and loops are about 60%. So if you look, you can try to, I think the slide that showed the examples was taken out, but loops kind of loop up and then come back down. Whorls kind of look like a circle, and sometimes if you have what I call an island in the middle, that would show you. Or if you have arches, they just look like big hills. So you can kind of look. That's just a class characteristic. That's just kind of telling us what that is. To actually identify a fingerprint, you have to look at the individual characteristics in that. So there's different ones that they look for. And if you look at yours, you can try to find them. To be able to individualize a fingerprint, you need to have at least 9 is what our lab kind of calls for. That's kind of a standardization across the board. So you have to find at least 9 different characteristics, individual characteristics on there. So you have ending ridges, which is just that. It's the line that stops. You can kind of see that. Bifurcation is where you have kind of splits and makes a Y. The bridge, I don't think they look for those as often, but it's kind of a line in your ridge detail that's connecting. Eyes or islands look just like an island. Trifurcations are just kind of when they go into 3, and then dots. So if you have it, you can kind of see if you can find 9 different to individualize. Now yours are inch prints, so you should be able to find 9 really quickly. If you need a magnifying glass, I did bring a couple because they are hard to see. So, I am not certified to do latent print comparison. It's very expensive and it takes a lot of equipment. The state lab does most of them. Now I do all of my own processing for fingerprints, so I will process that and I will develop my prints. I will send my lifts and my photographs to the state lab to be ran through APIS, which is an automated fingerprint system. Kind of like on TV, they run it through and they're able to maybe get some matches, but ultimately it's still a criminalist who makes that determination and identification. It is not a machine, so it is done by an actual criminalist. Did you find your different? And once we, in just a few minutes, you can come up here and you can try to do some latent prints. Latent, it means hidden, I think most of those. And that's kind of what we're doing is we're trying to develop that print. We're trying to make it visual to us. The most common way to do that is through dusting, fingerprint powder, and brushing. Kind of a couple reasons that that's the most common. A, it's cost effective. It's a lot cheaper than doing a lot of our chemicals that we do, which I do more so in the lab. If I'm at your home, I'm probably just going to do dusting. If I feel that it needs to have further development, I'm going to take it back to the lab. Probably not going to do a lot of chemical processing at your home, but it's also a really easy technique to learn, and it's hard to mess up, I guess. So that's one reason that we do a lot of powdering. You don't need the whole print to be able to make that identification. So here's the bifurcation right here. You can see where it splits. Kind of like what you're looking at. You have 2 ending ridges right there. You can see the ridges completely end. You have another bifurcation here, here, here. Another ending ridge. These little dots right here in the actual ridge detail, those are actually sweat glands. No 2 people have the same fingerprints. I think that's kind of something most people know. The reason that it's such a good piece of evidence for us is just for that. It's an individual thing that we can pinpoint our suspect. It's not since no 2 people have that, it's really ultimately easier for us to find a suspect if they're in APIS. If they're not, then we do have prints that just sit because they're not on APIS. We talked about that in the burglary. There's not a lot we can do about that. They form at 12 weeks gestation in utero, so that's kind of when you get your fingerprints is after your first trimester, you've already got your fingerprints. So that's pretty early if you think about it. Does anybody know what fingerprints really are when we leave our fingerprints?
The oils off the hand.
Oils. Fingerprints are actually 98.5% water. The other 1.5% is solids that have come off of the sweat, the amino acids, things like that, the oils. But 98% water, basically. That's why they're very delicate. I don't think that people realize that, but they are very delicate.
So they can evaporate.
They can, however, you can still usually get them by doing some different processing techniques. So, different chemicals that we use. I didn't bring a lot of it up here to do when they told me there was 33 of you. I thought that would probably not be good to be all of us dipping in chemicals, but this is kind of a neat one and I can pass it around. It's SPR, it's small particle reagent. It's really good to use on wet prints. So if you have a stolen vehicle that's been sitting out and it has the dew on it, it's kind of almost like a wet fingerprint powder, but we get really good results with that. So you can look at that. Crystal violet is pretty neat. You can get it off tape, fingerprints off tape. So if there's a tool and they wrapped duct tape around it, if we can get it undone with some sort of chemical, like I use Undo a lot, we have good results on getting the fingerprints right off of that. So you can check that out. Paper is really fun. You can get really good prints off paper. So if you have some sort of forgery, forged documents, checks, things like that, we can check paper for fingerprints. These didn't last very long. They do disappear, but we use a chemical called anhydrine. Spray it on there, warm it up. When you come up here, you can see them, but it is something that you need to photograph right away because they will start to kind of disappear a little bit. So you can't really see the picture on this PowerPoint, but that's one that has been used. We use the cyanacrylate, the super glue chamber. The fumes from that adhere to the prints and helps develop it. It is just a pre-treater, so we still have to use some, we can use powder, we can use yellow dye or something to actually bring that, but it's really good on baggies. So if you have a drug case and they've touched a lot of the baggies, it's really good to get prints off baggies. Latent section at the lab is not quite as bad as the DNA section. They're running about 6 to 9 months on results coming back. It used to be over a year, which was unfortunate because some of our cases, statute of limitations is about a year. So another thing that we kind of have to work with too with them, and I have a lot of good working relationships down there, which has helped for us. If you have a speedy trial demand and they're demanding that the trial go quickly, it's always helpful to have friends at the lab who can help you push your cases through a little bit faster, because you do need that evidence back. So this should actually probably be at the beginning of the PowerPoint, I guess. But photography is the one thing that you do at every single scene. There's not a lot of other things that I can say that yes, I'm going to do that at every scene, but photography is one of them. Especially in the digital era I talked about, there's no reason not to take tons of photographs. It's not uncommon for me to take a couple hundred photos on just a regular scene. If we have death investigation, homicide, or something like that, you could easily take 500 photographs, easily. Not only are you taking your overalls, but you're going to be taking your mid-range and your close-up. So every piece of evidence is going to have usually 3 steps or 3 different photographs. The good thing that we have now with digital documentation is some of these trials don't happen for months, if not years. I mean, you may not actually go to the courtroom for a good 2 years. For you to be able to A, remember that, or B, explain it to a jury, you have your documentation. So you just want to make sure that it's a fair and accurate representation of what you saw and what you did.
How often are you called to go to court?
When you have Jennifer Miller here, she'll answer that a little bit better. We don't go to court as often as we would like. One thing that I didn't know when I started this is there's only so many court dates throughout a year. And so that's why they kind of push things through. It kind of depends. We might have a rash of depots where we go and have depositions and it may not make it to trial, but a handful of times a year. It's really not as much as you would think. So I like to think it's just because the evidence is so good that they don't want to go to trial, but
Courtney, when did Kentucky become a policy of the department here on taking it at all scenes?
it's not policy
Okay.
to take it at all scenes.
Okay.
That there's no written policy that says that photograph has to be taken at scenes, that I'm aware of.
Okay.
When I'm called, I always take photographs.
Okay.
That's the first thing that I do before I do anything, is take my overalls. Just because I want that original, pristine documentation of what my scene looked like before I started doing anything. So, like officers on scenes, they don't necessarily have to take photographs.
With the new police department possibly getting a new building, do you have any equipment that you might get with the new building that would help you do your job better?
There are lots of different things that hopefully will make crime scene processing, I don't want to say easier, but better, to get better results, to get the results that we want. There's a couple different things right now. The lab that I have is very small. It's like a closet. There's not proper ventilation, so I'm limited on what I can do. If I'm using one of the sprays, there is someone in our office that's expecting a baby. So I need to make sure that if I know that she's in there, I have to make sure the fans are blowing the opposite direction, because I don't want her to have to smell that. So it's going to be nice if we do get a new building, I'll be able to do that in a more controlled manner, and utilize a lot of the different chemicals more for fingerprinting, because we'll have proper ventilation. Right now I just have a old kitchen hood that I turn on, and it just kind of circulates it back into wherever. So that's one thing. In my super glue fuming chamber, it's just an old cabinet that we've created. It works and it does the job that we need it to, but we would probably get better results if we had something that was actually supposed to be for CA fuming. The biggest one for me is I don't like to be cold. I hate being outside when it's cold, and so when I'm processing vehicles, which happens quite frequently, whether it be a stolen vehicle that's recovered, or if the vehicle has been used in some sort of crime, homicide, robberies, whatever it may be, our impound facility is not heated or cooled. It's just a Morton building. So a lot of times it's colder in there than it is outside, or hotter in there than it is outside. And I think we would see better results if we were able to have a controlled environment versus when it gets too cold, powders don't necessarily want to work or adhere to a vehicle. So when you're trying to dust a car and it's 20 below, you're not getting those results. Not to mention my fingers are cold. But ideally, it would be nice if we had a controlled environment for that. And I'm hopeful. It is in the plans right now that if the building bond issue passes, that there is a garage stall just for vehicle processing. So that would be a really nice addition for us. So,
Good to know.
thank you for asking.
Thank you.
Here's a couple of fingerprints, or photographs that were taken on scene that I've taken. That was taken at a burglary when we had the Rasha storage unit burglaries. We were able to make an arrest on that based off that fingerprint. So I was able to photograph, lift that, send it to the state lab, and got a hit through APHIS. So that's another reason we take a lot of photographs is I could send that print, that close-up, to the lab and say, here you go, but they're going to want to know where it came from, especially if you go to court. Where did it come from? It came from the teal box. I do use a DSLR camera. The officers just have point and shoots. So one reason they call me a lot of times to take photographs. Lots of different equipment that comes with it. When I talk about shoe impressions or shoe wear being my absolute favorite, I've had really good luck with it, so maybe that's why, I don't know. But I have this little piece of equipment. It's called a static dust lifter, and it's able to lift prints off hard surfaces. So does anybody want to be a guinea pig and do this real quick? Anybody? Okay. So this works really well on hard surfaces if someone's walked in on a tile floor or a hardwood surface, whether it be a home burglary or a convenience store or something. Do you see any shoe impressions on the table? Okay. So lighting's really important. I never go on a scene daytime or nighttime without a flashlight, but to use oblique lighting, and I don't mean to blind anybody. If you look at the table, you're going to be able to find. Do you see it?
Mm-hmm.
So, but it's still hard, and to photograph that, it would be even harder. So we have this nice little film that we use. And basically, we're gonna utilize the shock and be able to, so you just turn it on. You just turn this to the, and it may not do it on the table. I guess I didn't think about that. See how it's kind of sucking down to the table? I've been shocked. I wouldn't touch it. I've been shocked a couple times. It's not too bad.
Now she tells me.
Yeah.
Normally, when it was on a floor or some other surface, obviously the table's not working for whatever reason, it instantly goes, and you can hear it and see the film. So, hopefully, if we hit it right, it's gonna.
Yep.
Okay, so, I know it's hard to see. You guys can come up here and look at it in a little bit. You can kind of see the shoe impression. See it?
Yes, yeah.
So with the contrast on the black film, it's very easy to photograph, and we get really good results. This is kind of neat. ALS is alternate light source. We use this for looking for bodily fluids, but it also can help with fingerprint processing. If you do a chemical processing, it can make it easier and help develop that print. It's really good for bruising and injuries. Even if the bruise has started to fade and it's not very visible with the eye, if we use ultraviolet light, we can get a bruise that's a couple weeks old. Using the camera, a filter on the camera and the ultraviolet, it actually goes clear down through the layers and pulls that up. So that's pretty neat. If anybody has an old bruise and you want to put on the yellow goggles, use the, I guess I only brought a 400. So use the purple, and you should be able to see some bruising. It's pretty neat too. I've had enough training to be able to look at a print and say, yeah, that's probably so-and-so.
You're pretty certain if you send it off for verification.
Yes. But more often than not, I ended up with a print and no suspect. So we do have to utilize the APHIS system and try to get that identification through that.
Courtney does a good job, doesn't she?
Yeah.
We're very lucky at the police department to have her. My name is Sergeant Melinda Roop. I'm with the Marshalltown Police Department Canine Unit. This is Sergeant Kyle Stevenson and Sergeant Tom Watson. We'll be kind of going through some things here real quickly, and then eventually we'll head down to our local street department where we'll get you into the action a little bit with the dogs. Between the three of us, we've got a lot of years of canine experience here. I've got probably 16, 17. Both these guys have got years under their belts as well. They're working dogs, I'm not. So I'm going to try to let them do as much of the yip-yapping as they can. And so I'll get into a little bit of it here. We got our first police dog here in Marshalltown all the way up to our most recent addition, which is Canine Jordy, and you'll meet him in a little while here. It's a little hard for me to say in a short period of time how much these dogs do for us here at the police department. They are expensive. We'll talk about that a little bit. They are a lot of work and a lot of liability. But they can provide us with a tool that all the equipment in the world cannot. And that tool thinks and acts. So it's a lot different than any other piece of equipment that we have at the police department. The nose is the most valuable thing on that dog. But the mere presence of a canine makes a difference. I can go back to stories with our unit back in the 80s where there were actually hit lists out there for the dog. They had like this $20,000 thing going on that they were going to pay for the dog somebody to shoot the dog. You know, stuff like that. You know, that's not the kind of thing that happens anymore, fortunately. But they are so valuable that people will not want to work. Or not want to do bad things, I should say to them. It's their jobs, I guess. But they don't want to do bad things when the dogs are working. They have two distinct skills that they are trained in that are utilized here at the police department. The first being patrol. And you're going to get to see some of this stuff. It's very cool. The patrol stuff. That would be like tracking, using their nose to find people. using their nose to find evidence and things like that. That's the patrol side of what these dogs do for us, handler protection, stuff like that. And then the other purpose that they have for us is narcotic detection. Narcotic detection being the bread and butter for us here in Marshalltown, kind of goes along with tracking a little bit, but narcotics are always going to be around. It's where the dogs are at their most valuable. Luger was dual purpose trained, as are all of our dogs. He had a pretty long history here at the police department. If you, some of you have been around a while, you might remember the Swift strikes. It was a very volatile time there for us down on the east side of town. Luger played a very valuable role in that. His presence was, believe it or not, very calming. Not just to the officers, but to some of the folks that were there as well. Not utilized as a use of force necessarily, but it was just something about the presence of that dog made him go, yeah, okay, let's just relax here. Monty, he was handled by Officer Randy Kessler, who is still with the Marshalltown Police Department to this day. Monty was a big boy, probably 110 pounds. He was also dual purpose trained.
All right, again, I'm Kyle Stevenson. I'm currently handling a dog. This canine Creasy was actually my first dog. That's when I first came into the canine unit. In 2009 is when I got Creasy. When I got him, we were kind of in a transition, like Mel was saying. When they first were getting these dogs, they were kind of pound dogs, and then we started going to, these dogs are actually bred for this. A lot of times in the older dogs, or in the previous dogs, they would have to wait till they were a little bit older, more mature, to be able to mentally and physically handle the demands of the train that we put on them. So it was a big change for us when I actually got Creasy. He was right at a year old, actually just under a year old when I first got him, and we started training right around a year old. If you think about it, anybody that's had dogs and their puppies, it's hard to contain all that energy, and it's also hard to get that focus out of them. So it's kind of a challenge. When I came into the unit, I actually grew up with a police dog in the house. I was lucky enough, my dad is a retired deputy out of Jasper County, and he had a dog too. So I had a little bit of knowledge of what the home life would be like with a dog and some background as far as that went. But as far as training a dog, I had no experience whatsoever with it. I wouldn't have known how to get a dog to sit, to do any of that. So the beauty of what we do at St. Paul is when we go up there, they actually train us to train the dogs. So we don't go up there and have them train the dogs. There are options out there for that kind of thing. You can send your dog to somebody, or they'll actually pre-train dogs for you. It takes less time, but the problem is when you run into issues, then you don't know how to go back and fix them. The beauty of the dogs that we have now is when we have issues, and inevitably you're going to have issues when you run dogs, we can actually go back and we can start taking steps back to fix those problems. So great experience for me going up there with Creasy, learning how the progression worked, learning how to get them to do all the things that we want them to do. Creasy, like I said, I got him in 2009. In 2012, he had a kind of an odd injury. I was working one night, went to let him out, to empty him out, and as soon as he jumped down, I heard him kind of yelp a little bit, and basically his whole back end gave out on him. So he had a spinal embolism is what they eventually said, lost all function in his back end. Kind of rehabbed him a little bit, started walking a little bit again, but kind of went back downhill. He did eventually retire. We tried keeping him home for a little bit and eventually had to put him down, so Creasy is no longer living. Then I got out of the unit for a little bit, and now I'm currently back in the program with another dog, Raji. Raji is, we got him in 2012, and again, we're at more of a transition. We're used to running the German Shepherds. Police have used a variety of different dogs, German Shepherd being the predominant one, for a lot of reasons. We'll kind of talk about some of that here in a little bit. But there's also a push here recently to start moving to the Belgian Malinois. Raji is a Malinois mix, like a German Shepherd Malinois mix. Very similar to the German Shepherd. The difference is they're a little bit more high drive dogs. You get a little bit more energy out of them. But the same thing, you got to keep in mind when you got that more energy, you have to contain that energy too. So there's some challenges with it. Non-stop work, and they want to work, and believe me, these dogs, they love what they do. That's the one time, you know, with Raji, it's funny because at home he never barks, never makes a sound, up until it's about 9 o'clock at night and I start getting ready for work, As soon as he hears me go downstairs where I keep my uniform, he starts going crazy out there. He's just ready to go. As soon as you let him out of the kennel, he's right up to the car wanting to get in. These dogs love what they do. So it's a fun ride, very rewarding position doing this. You get to do a lot of good, like Mel talked about too. So.
Hi everybody, I'm Sergeant Tom Watson. Little background of born and raised here in Marshalltown, graduated high school here in 1998. So I'm a city boy here. This is my dog Raji. This is my dog Jordy. He's like Raji from one of your other cousins, and he's 2 years old. He's been working the street now for about a year. This is about a year ago this time we went up to St. Paul and got our 12 weeks of training. Like Raji, he's a Belgian Malinois and a German Shepherd mix. One thing that Sergeant Stevenson was talking about with the Belgian Malinois is they are very high driven and they're very sensitive too. So they demand your respect and they demand fairness, and they'll let you know if they think it's unfair. And so their behavior, sometimes they're really happy, sometimes they're really down, and that's just how the Malinois are, just very sensitive dogs.
Sergeant Roop was talking about these dual-purpose dogs. There's two sides to them. So she's talking about two separate skills that they have. And reality is the dogs actually have a lot of separate skills. It's just we section them off into different things. You got narcotics detection, which takes on a lot of different odors the dogs are able to find. And then you got the patrol section. Like she said before, the patrol stuff is talking about finding people in general or evidence, things like that. Everything that the dogs do that is not drug-related falls under this patrol category. One of the biggest parts that we focus on when the patrol stuff goes is obedience. And the obedience runs its course through everything we do, even into the narcotics portion some. Obedience for our dogs is top priority. We have to have obedient dogs. They have to be able to listen to what we say to be able to safely run them on the streets. Because of the things that we're doing and because of the current liability in law enforcement, we have to be able to have our dogs listen to what we say. We're going to do some obedience demonstration here in a little bit, and I'm not going to claim, it's the funny thing is it's always my dog's never done that before. That's like the funny saying that all can't handle. My dog's never done this before until you get to a certification trial or until you get to a drug search warrant. Well, he's never done this before, but you first start off and he just takes off from you, and it happened to me my very first one. So. I'm not going to tell you my dog won't miss a command tonight when we do this. I'm not going to tell you that sometimes they don't mess up their dogs. That's part of it. But we train and train and train on this obedience section. The way we train our obedience is a combination of corrections, which we generally use like a choke type chain, quick corrections. They're not intended to hurt the dog. They're just intended to get the dog's attention. We've also transitioned into using some electric collar, e-collar. A lot of people that train dogs use e-collars, and the reason is same thing. It's even actually less aggressive of a correction than what a physical correction would be with a choke chain. It's just like a little tick. We actually will put it on ourselves. Tom would more so. I was scared of it, but I finally broke down and started doing. No, it really doesn't hurt. It's just a little tick. It almost just feels like somebody just is touching you there. And what it is, a communication for the dog to remind them, hey, I'm still here. You got to listen to what I say. So. We use a combination of that, and then we really try to focus on, and there's been a big push lately towards more of a like a reward system, you know what I'm saying? So it's more of a, when they do what they want, they're going to get this reward. So they're not going to get rewarded unless they do what it is we want them to do. So you kind of use a balancing act there of those things to gain that obedience. We can kick our leash off our dog and he'll stay right beside us when we tell him to. No matter where he's at, he'll come to us and go into a heel position where we tell him to. But one of the things is just that healing. So when you walk, you have to be able to control your dog off leash in case you ever need to do it out on the streets. You have to be able to call your dog in mid-return. You have to be able to stop your dog with either a hand or a voice command. And those hand or voice commands can consist of a sit command, a down command, or a stand or a stay command where the dog will just stand. So what you were looking at right there was actually a stay command by hand. So without the handler saying anything, the dog comes to him, he holds his hand up, and the dog stops and stands right there. It's actually very, very impressive to watch the dogs and watch their ability to do some of these things and some of the control that you see with during some of these trials. And one of the other functions that we do from the patrol side is an article or an evidence recovery. One of the biggest uses, we actually do a lot of this kind of stuff. One of the biggest uses is an officer goes to stop somebody and that person takes off running from the officer, and they get ahead of them, and somewhere in there you believe that they've ditched something, they've thrown something, whether it be a gun, whether it be drugs, things like that. We'll utilize the dogs as in a backtracking type of way to try to search for any kind of evidence. The other place that a lot of places we've used this, sometimes even inadvertently, is we use it for like burglaries. So somebody breaks into a house and they take a bunch of stuff, and when officers get there, they leave too. And I know Mel's had some really good ones over the history where what she's actually doing is a track, and we kind of incorporate all this training in so that the dogs can do all of this at once. But when she's actually running a track trying to find the person, the dog will actually find an article of evidence too. So you're getting all these functions out of it as the dog's working.
The second part of what the dogs are trained to do is obviously the narcotic detection. These are a few of the drugs that our dogs are trained here in Marshalltown to find. We find every single one of those on a regular basis on the street. A lot of people think, oh, there's not any heroin in Marshalltown. Well, I beg to differ with you. It may not be as common, but there is. So we have to train all these odors. A lot of people are curious. I get little kids that'll raise their hands in the school and they'll say, how do you teach these dogs to find drugs? And little kids will go, did you addict them to the drugs? Is that why they find it? You know, and kids are so innocent. I mean, it's a shame that they know that, but that's not what happens with dogs. It's a very simple process, and Kyle's going to bring his dog in here in a little bit. Tom will show you some work here in a little bit. You're going to see how much they love doing this. It's a big old game of hide and seek. Let's let Raji come in here. Raji is a good boy. He's a hard-working fella.
Full of energy right now.
And happy to go to work. You can see he may look thin to you. He is actually not. He is perfectly underweight at weight right now.
She's talking about the dog, not me.
I wasn't gonna say. A lot of people look at these dogs and think, oh my God, they're starving them to death. And that's absolutely not the truth. First of all, they have so much energy they wouldn't gain a freaking pound anyway. But that is exactly how he is supposed to be right there. That weight is exactly what he's supposed to be at.
Sit.
He doesn't know where the box is that has the drugs. He just knows that one of them has that odor that he's supposed to alert to. When you start with a new dog, you're gone for 12 weeks. And you live in St. Paul and you do that 12 weeks of training, and it's a huge sacrifice on the part of our city to be without that officer for that period of time. Plus the cost of just purchasing the dog, it's around $15,000 total. That's the training and the dog, everything combined, because you're living in St. Paul basically for 12 weeks.
Each of these dogs is a certain officer's dog, right?
Correct. Single.
Will they work with others if they have to, or that's pretty tough?
No, we pretty much do not do that. There are departments that will share the dog amongst a couple officers, but for our purposes, that dog becomes his partner. Jordy is Sergeant Watson's partner, and he lives with him. He's with him 24/7, and Courtney's still here. She can attest that he's probably with that dog way more than he is with her. I mean, it's just part of the deal.